They had night vision. They had TV-guided missiles.
We'd be speaking German here in this country if Germany had gotten the atomic bomb before we did.
Well, in my book, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, I present the argument that they did. But here was the problem, George. By the time they had one ready to go, it was already pushing into 1945, and the war basically was already lost for them, okay?
Yeah.
Now, they had two problems. One, they had the bomb, but they didn't really have a reliable delivery system. The V-2 rockets and even the A-10 they were working on, their guidance system was they aimed at the target and tried to calculate the fuel so it would run out over the target and drop down.
Well, in some cases, it became the target after it landed.
Right.
You know?
Right. So they had that problem. They were developing a huge base in Norway, which they held on to right to the bitter end, even though there was no strategic reason to hold Norway. And at that base, they had 40 of these big, huge six-engine bombers that were fully capable of reaching New York. In fact, the crews there, when they were taken into captivity, said that they were working on a mission to New York. And there are even plans, I have seen the plans for a nuclear bomb blast radius on the island of Manhattan. So in fact, they flew one of these six-engine bombers to within 26 miles of New York and photographed the skyline. So that's how close they were. But they weren't quite ready. The base wasn't ready. They just didn't have a reliable delivery system. And the second thing, and think about this, George, if say in January, February of 1945, Germany had delivered an atomic bomb and dropped it on Manhattan, and that would have been horrendous. But would we have stopped the war? Would we have sued for peace? I don't think so. I think all that would have done was just assure that we would have not left one stone standing in Germany. We would have dropped some ourselves. Oh, we would have obliterated the place, okay? Yes. And nobody wanted that. So they opted instead to make a deal, and they swapped us some of this technology in exchange for immunity, and that's why that, of course, gave rise to Project Paperclip, where we brought thousands of these unreconstructed Nazis into the United States and rolled them into our military-industrial complex with the argument to the people over here that were in the know. Of course, the public knew nothing about this, but the people, high-ranking military people in the Army, Navy, the Air Force, they were told this was necessary because we had to have that knowledge in order to meet the Russians.
Exactly. And of course, it was, I think, the Project Paperclip was the onset of us forming NASA in getting those German scientists, including Werner von Braun included.
Yeah, who was one of the most highly decorated Nazis of them all. And but they were all whitewashed. Their backgrounds were whitewashed by John J. McCloy. And this is amazing because prior to the war, John J. McCloy had been the CEO of City National Bank, which is now Citicorp, and was the largest lender of money to Nazi Germany. So he was definitely on their side. And after the war, he gets named as High Commissioner of Germany, and he's the one that got them all over here. And then his protege, Alan Dulles, had been a lawyer representing the Nazi Schroeder Bank, and he was a big OSS, intelligence guy during the war. And then he comes over here and becomes head of the CIA, and he helps expunge their records of their Nazi backgrounds.
And he hated Kennedy, didn't he?
Well, that's another thing. If you stop and think about it, both McCloy and Dulles sat on the Warren Commission to decide what happened to Kennedy.
Yeah, and they hated Kennedy.
And they hated him. Yeah, they saw him as a big threat to the plans for the New Order. And so it's just the whole story is amazing. And what I say, George, is what you don't know can hurt you.
That's right. No,
contrary to the old adage.
Now, this technology that the Nazis possessed, this flying saucer technology, was it technology they created because they were so advanced, or did they have a captured craft and they reverse engineered it?
That is a very interesting question, and I've tracked that for a number of years, and I've heard various rumors that they had captured a flying saucer, kind of like a la Roswell, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in North Africa, and yet every time I tried to track those stories, it never really panned out. There's really never been any real proof that they ever captured some hardware somewhere. So I am now of the opinion that they got it through other means, and that other means comes down to what we now know and what you've had various people on talking about, remote viewing, okay? Psychic stuff. Now, you go back all the way to the end of World War I and through the 20s and into the 30s, the spiritualism was what they called it then, and they would have seances, try to contact the dead.
Deep into the occult, weren't they?
Deep into the occult, and the top Nazis were right there with all that. In fact, this will blow you away. I was talking to the trainer of the U.S. Army's remote viewers, and he said at one point there was a meeting after all this, came public, and everybody was talking about remote viewing, and the Iron Curtain fell, communism collapsed, and so they had a meeting with their Russian counterparts. They were called extrasensors, and he was told that our remote viewing program got started as a response to the Russian psychic research programs, right? So he said they got started because of these Nazi scientists that came over and were talking about their study of psychic phenomena. And the Russians took them seriously and continued the Nazi experimentation and resulted in their extrasensors. Then we, Johnny-come-lately, said, well, gee, if the Russians, Soviets are doing it, we got to do it. So we started studying remote viewing and made it work, and then created the Army's Grill Flame remote viewing unit. But the Nazi scientists had been operating under the code name Magic, M-A-J-I-K.
Aha.
Now, does that ring a bell with you, George?
It does. Whenever I hear that, I think of Stanton Friedman.
Exactly. So all of a sudden, see, the top guys who are concerned with our high cutting-edge technology, to include UFOs, started off as Magic 12, and then they changed it to Majestic 12, and most people simply know it as MJ12. So I think the Nazis got their technology by psychic contact with who knows who, aliens, other dimensions, future people in the future. Who knows? But it was they obviously were getting some pretty good stuff because they came out with some incredible technology.
Jim, when we come back, I want to ask you if they ever flew these vehicles, these craft. We'll be back.